evening. Good to be here, in spite of the rain and thunderstorms. It came down pretty hard. We're in the study of Daniel. We're in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the last of the one that recounts what we might call just general narrative. Events that occurred that demonstrate God's power amongst His people, even in captivity, and specifically in front of the rulers, whether it's the Babylonians or the Persians. So you've got both of those that have been represented here in these chapters from chapter 1 through chapter 6. You've got Nebuchadnezzar, you've got Belshazzar, you've got Darius, or Cyrus, as it's thought that he actually is. So you've got these godly men, if you like, that represent God to these great rulers who are rulers of the whole world. And it's a demonstration that even though they've been taken into captivity, even though they are the lowest of the low, if you like, their God is still greater than any other God. And even Nebuchadnezzar got to that point where he had to admit that was so. So we've got this idea coming through in these chapters. And chapter 6 deals with a Persian ruler. And it's mentioned in verse 1, it seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. So you've got these satraps who are in charge of different regions of the kingdom, and over them there are 3 others. So it's structured so there's 3 commissioners, one of them whom was Daniel, so that these satraps might be accountable to them and the king might not suffer loss. And these chapters are very good at laying the foundation for what is to follow, because what God has demonstrated in the chapters up to this point is that He is in control of events, and He can make His outcome, the desired outcome, the outcome that He wants, that will occur, and that He works through people to achieve that particular outcome. But He is still in control of the time and of the events, of the things that occur. And so we've had examples of that throughout these chapters, where these rulers, these powerful rulers, realize that they're dealing with the one true God who has power over everything. So that's what's laid out as a foundation for what's going to follow. And it's the literature will change from chapter 7, because up to now, as I said, it's been very much, a lot of it has been narrative. There has of course been visions, the vision of the statue, but a lot of it actually has been events that have occurred with the powerful leader and the man of God. But then the literature is going to switch, and it's going to be very much dreams and visions, and it's going to be represented, even that is going to be represented in different ways as the book unfolds. And some really powerful information is going to come through it. So we're going to be switching next week pretty much to a different way of looking at, or at least it's going to present itself in a different way. So Daniel is going to change. It's not going to be what we've had up to this point. And it's going to take some attention and some concentration, but it's really worth it, because it's going to help to build up your faith and strengthen your faith that yes, this is from God, and it can only be from God. And well, as a result of the fact that this can basically give events that are going to occur in a very broad sense over a long period of time, particularly a 400-year period after Babylon, or 500-year period after Babylon. It's going to give a timeline bringing the Messiah into the world and bringing his kingdom into the world. So that's a very specific timeline over a very short, it's hundreds of years, so maybe short is the wrong term as far as that is concerned. As a result of that, because it's doing something that is very unusual, and that is it's playing out kingdoms, it's giving different kingdoms that occur over this period of time. There's a lot of critics of the Bible who've tried to shift Daniel from the period that he's writing, which is during the captivity, right up to the first few years of the reign of Cyrus. Because of that, they're trying to push Daniel to a couple of hundred years before Christ. But even if you do that, but you can't really, but even if you could place Daniel as being written then, and not as it's claimed during the period of time of these particular kings and so on, it still doesn't answer all the questions about what is occurring and what is going to occur right up to the 1st century. So the attempt to push it closer to the 1st century still doesn't solve the problem that they have, that it's still predicting things that are going to occur in the 1st century, and it does with particular accuracy. And what that already tells you is if it can do that and do it with particular accuracy, then that's genuine. Then the rest of it must also be genuine. That this is not just a production just a couple of hundred years before Christ, but it is what it claims to be. And why is that so important? Because then you can see God working throughout history and prophesying through visions what is going to occur over the centuries with nations, with kingdoms and so on. So it's a very powerful book from that standpoint. And apart from anything else, it reads according to its time. It reads according to its time. In other words, this chapter reflects the Persian way of life accurately. Just as the Babylonian chapters with Nebuchadnezzar reflect the Babylonian kingdom as it was accurately. So you've got this accurate representation of kingdoms as they occur in the first few chapters. And the result of that is that it just adds to his credibility as being from that time. Because the further removed you are from the time, the more mistakes you would make with regard to the way that it's represented, the way that it was in reality. And especially in modern times with archaeology and all the discoveries of the libraries of these great nations, we were able to see what their customs were, what their practices were, what terms that they used. And you can see all of that in Daniel. So it's a very credible book. And that just shores up our belief in it as a book that's telling this whole idea of what is going to happen over this period of hundreds of years. And we know nobody can do that. No human being can tell you what's going to happen, even tomorrow. Now, sometimes you can guess what's going to happen tomorrow. But generally speaking, things happen that are unexpected, because that's the way life goes. But to actually predict things hundreds of years in advance and then play out in reality, that's a recognition that this has to be from God. And that's what the book is going to do. So we're in this last section that is setting the stage for that particular time. And essentially we're at the stage where Cyrus is the Medo-Persian ruler who has conquered Babylon. And having conquered Babylon, he does what a lot of conquerors do. He retains a lot of the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracies are forever. They're always there. And so you don't just throw everybody out and then put new people in without the new people knowing what the old people were doing, because the old bureaucracy knows where all the bodies are buried. They know everything that has to be done. They know where the people are. They know who's got money. They know who doesn't have money. All of these things, they have a system in place where they're taking taxes, bringing in money for the ruler, And so the bureaucracy is very often retained and put into place. Now, in Daniel chapter 5, we've had a situation where Belshazzar is the Babylonian king. He's the last Babylonian king. In fact, he's the son of the ruling king of that time. But he's in Babylon itself, and he's ruling in the place of his father in Babylon. His father's way off doing archaeology, digging up old ruins. So in Daniel chapter 5, we actually get him being killed. It's the vision that he has is on the last night of his reign, and he's having one big fat party as a result of that. It's most likely he thinks, or he's deluding himself, that his kingdom is going to continue, that he'll be able to keep out the Medes and the Persians. But that very night he's going to die. His time is up. And so he pulls in Daniel, and he promises him all these great things, and all these fantastic clothes, and so on. And I can imagine that he might have just piled all of them. Verse 29, Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed, this is chapter 5, Daniel with purple, and put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him. Now he had authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. And Daniel has actually been quite rude to him in this whole process, and he had already told him, don't give me this stuff, give it to somebody else, I'm not interested. But nevertheless, he puts all of this stuff on Daniel, and I can just imagine Daniel going out of the dining hall there and tossing all the stuff as he goes. He goes flying off down the corridor with the gold chain there, pearls there, this fancy robe there. He's just totally fed up with this man who God has given an opportunity to realize that time's up, and he hasn't taken it. And Daniel's totally fed up with him, and so he goes off. But with the new ruler, when Cyrus comes in, he basically retains Daniel as one of the key men, because Daniel's got this really good reputation. And so even though the traditional bureaucracy are not too happy with, and never been too happy with Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they've never been happy with him. They've got a great reputation, and Daniel in particular has continued, and so it's a case of he's prominent. So when they've conquered Babylon, and they've killed everybody they want to kill, and they've taken what they want to take, then they put the bureaucracy back in place, and Daniel is one of them. In fact, he's one of the 3 commissioners, so he's above all the satraps. So essentially you've got this whole governmental system in place to make sure everything runs smoothly, and to make sure that the taxes are collected, and then the king doesn't get cheated from having everything that he needs. So all of that is in place. And just a few words on Darius, or Darius, depends on what you do, which one you do. When I was much younger, for a short period of time, Dookie, believe it or not, I was in a choir before my, teens. I still can't believe it. I think they made a mistake. They were listening to the wrong person and putting me in a choir. But one of the songs we sang that was Darius the Mede was a king and a conqueror. Darius the Mede was the king and the conqueror. So, but it wasn't long before they chucked me out of the choir. So the teacher asked me, why aren't you singing? I said, my voice is no good. She said, come here. I had to sing in front of her. She says, you're right, out you go. And that's been my story ever since with regard to singing. It's like, it's near you. Okay, out you go. But nevertheless, Darius the Mede is actually thought to be, by many scholars, Cyrus himself. Right? But then he's got 2 names. Now we're quite familiar with that kind of thing, that people have different names, right? you've actually got two major kingdoms that have come together here. One of them is the Persian kingdom, which is Iran today. And one of them is Media, which is actually east of Iran. I actually don't know what the area that is Media. I don't know what that is today. That's one of the areas I'm not up to date on. But, so you've got these two kingdoms that basically came together. And so they've got joint rule. So you've got Medes and Persians. And Darius is basically called a Mede. Okay? So, if you look at verse 28 of the last verse of chapter 6, you've got, so this Daniel enjoys success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Cyrus the Persian. So you've got Darius the Mede, and you've got Cyrus the Persian. And it's the way that Hebrew, it's the way Hebrew goes, that you can possibly translate it, the conjunction "and" as "that is." That's the way that Hebrew goes. The "and" in Hebrew is quite flexible. It's just one letter. But it's quite flexible in the way that it allows you to represent something. You might remember that a little bit, Martin, maybe not, right? How the "and" can change things. It even can change tense in Hebrew. So it has some flexibility. So it's thought that a better way to have actually translated verse 28 is, so this Daniel enjoys success in the reign of Darius, that is, instead of "and," that is, in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay. So, because we know that Cyrus was the first ruler when he conquered, when Babylon was conquered. But it appears that you're talking about Darius there. Some people think that refers to somebody else who was put in charge of Babylon, the kingdom of Babylon, because Cyrus only stayed there for about a year, and essentially, about 538, 537, he conquered Babylon. And then 536, the Jews were given permission to go home by Cyrus. So he only spent about a year in Babylon before going back to Persia. And so some people think, well, this is the guy he put in charge. His name was Darius, Darius the Mede. But it's more likely that Darius the Mede is his median. As a Mede, he was called Darius the Mede. And in Persia, he was called Cyrus. So it depends where you are, so which name you use, right? We're all familiar with that, right? So depending on where you are, you might use a different name. Depending on the company you're with, you might use a different name. So some of you will use a more Western name if you're in a more Western company, but you prefer to use your ethnic name, right? Your vendor name or your suitor name or whatever. But you're still the same person. You're still the same person, but you're known by two different names. So this is probably what has happened. And so, and I think that it's a pretty good argument, and I go along with it. So I'm going to take it as true and genuine that Darius is actually Cyrus. Cyrus is the one, and even in prophecy, Cyrus is the one who conquers the Babylonians, and then it's prophesied in Isaiah chapter 44 and 45 that he's going to take the Jews back. He's going to be God's shepherd, God's anointed to take the Jews back, and they're going to lay the foundation of the temple that had been destroyed in 586. So you've got this Cyrus. He appoints Daniel. Daniel is one of the survivors. Daniel doesn't get killed, but he gets appointed to a very high position in the new government under Darius the Mede, or Cyrus the Persian. Okay? So this is what's happening. And Daniel does what you expect Daniel to do. He does a great job. Why? Because Daniel serves God first. And so he serves with integrity. He's not there to enrich himself. Remember, he's been in Babylon since he was a boy. And right in the beginning, what is the first thing that he did when they put him in that environment and were teaching him Persian, and not Persian, Chaldean, and teaching him the customs. What is the first thing that he did? And said, hold on. First thing he did, he said, hold on, I'm not going to eat your food. Just give me vegetables and water and my companions. That's the first thing he did. So even as a young man, he did this. So this is somebody who's got tremendous integrity. Right? So in a world where integrity is in short supply, it doesn't make him popular. And it makes him very difficult to deal with, because they can't point to him and say, there's corruption, he's skimming off the top, or he's taking off the bottom, or he's taking out of the middle. Because here's somebody who is not taking any money for himself. He's not interested in wealth. You know, you can imagine that in a lot of the movies of the period, and that somebody who Belshazzar would have showered with all of this, all of this jewelry and gold and all these very expensive garments, that the guy would rush into his bedroom and start packing his bag, to disappear. But that's not Daniel. He's not like that. He's got tremendous integrity. And it's a real example for us, because it's, because it is so rare. And it would be frustrating to everybody, because he's just too perfect. Okay? Brother Munyeziwa, he's just too perfect. Okay? He's a very annoying person to most of those that are around him. And so, because of that, you see in verse 3 that he had this extraordinary spirit in the latter part of the verse, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So that was the intention of the king, because his reputation is there for integrity. He's the guy who works the hardest. When everybody else has gone to sleep, he's still working. When everybody else is waking up, he's been up for, he's had his coffee an hour before. Well, not coffee in his case, but anyway, we'll just say. So that kind of person, he's a very hard worker, he's a very honest one. There's no evidence of corruption, as verse 4. The commissioners and satraps began trying to find ground for accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could find no grounded accusation. And these are experts, so if there was something, they would have found it, because they know all the tricks of the trade. They know how to skim money, because that's what they do. And this guy in power is just too honest, and what it means, it's not going to help their case. Because if he gets appointed at the top, he knows what they're up to, and he'll stop them. They won't be able to do that, or he'll replace them. So that puts their position at risk. The fact that he's going to get promoted right to the top, it puts their position at risk. They have to get rid of him. So, but they could find no negligence, no corruption. He doesn't go off early from work. He made sure everything is done that should be done, and in the right way. And it's collected, and the king gets what is due to him, and no money gets skimmed off for himself personally or for anybody else. And so they've got to hatch a plan. So what do? They say in verse 5, we will not find any ground of accusation against Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. So it's like, okay, this is how we get to him, because we know that he worships his God and no other, in a region where people don't really care which God they worship, as long as they're keeping the rulers happy. Daniel is different, of course. Okay? It's what we expect. So the idea is keep your integrity. People will see it. You will get a name for it, but you do it not for other people. You do it for God, which is what he's doing. So they go up to King Darius or Cyrus, and they speak to him as follows: King Darius, live forever. That's the phrase "live forever" was what they would always use for kings. And you can see it with the British national anthem. God save the Queen. When she's dead, it's God save the King. So it's that kind of idea. It's may you live a very long time, may you be blessed with life, may you live forever, is the statement that they made to him. Then all the commissioners in the kingdom, the priests and the satraps, the high officials and governors, they say, we've consulted, we've thought about this, and we think it's a good idea. And what's the idea? That the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction. So they want a statute that has teeth, that there's punishment behind the statute. Anybody who doesn't do what we say gets punished. That anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, why do you think they did that? Why do you think they did it for 30 days? Or at least why do something like that in any case? Why would the king think this is plausible anyway? It seems rather odd, doesn't it? And only for 30 days. We know why they did it for 30 days, right? By the Talmud, because that's all they needed. They didn't even need 30 days. But 30 days was good enough. But why would they make an injunction like this just for a short period of time? Well, part of it is that this is a new government and a new king, and he's still establishing his rule. So even though he's conquered them, he's also got them, he's got to get them to figure out we need to listen to this guy. Because if we don't listen to him, we're going to get punished. And if he's going to enhance his reputation by saying you're only allowed to worship me, it's that typical idea in kings of the ancient world where they took divinity upon themselves. Even though we think it's a little bit crazy, don't we? But that's a very human being, it's a very human thing, I should say, a very human thing to do. Is that people are in a very high status. Some I think that they're above the normal rules of life. They don't have to follow the normal rules, they're above that. And that's true throughout history. That's true. It's part of human nature. The higher you fly, the greater you think you are. And you're not subject to the normal rules that everybody else is subject to. That's the general thing. And so you get this idea of semi-divinity or of divinity. And so not only will it be putting some fear into your subjects, but it's almost like saying, recognize that you are dealing with a God. You're not dealing with a human being here. You're dealing with a God. So a bit of his vanity is also appealing to his vanity to some extent as well. So the injunction is that any man who does that shall be cast into the lion's den. So they said to him, now king, establish the injunction, verse 8, and sign the document, sign on the dotted line. He said, it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Okay? So this is one of those things that is a big deal with regard to all of this, is the fact that the Medes and Persians had this system of laws that once the law was in place, it had to be enacted. And the king couldn't just overrule it and say, I forget that. And we saw that, you see that with Esther. Most of the women in this class know all about Esther. You do, don't you? Maybe, sisters. Esther. Know a lot about Esther. Know a lot about the law of the Medes and Persians. Right? You should, right? Probably more than the men. Maybe I'm wrong, but I won't ask you because just in case I'm wrong. But I think I'm probably right, that you know more about it. So anyway, they go through that whole process, and the king signs it, and Daniel knew about it, and it's almost like with Daniel, it's like, okay, here we go again. So, what he does is he goes and he puts his windows open towards Jerusalem, and continued kneeling, you see in verse 10, on his knees 3 times a day, praying towards Jerusalem, giving thanks to God, as he'd been doing previously. So that was his custom, to go into his room, open the window, kneel down and pray. Now it almost gives the impression that that Daniel's throwing out wide open these big windows, and that everybody can see him. And it's like, hey, everybody, neighbor, that kind of thing. No, it's not like that. The kind of windows they had were actually high and narrow, right? So that you did have some privacy and that thieves couldn't come in through the windows. They were very narrow, and they would have sort of wooden slats to close them. So you would open the wooden slats, and then you kneel towards Jerusalem. And what happens, and then these men, verse 11, came by agreement and catch him in the act, as they intended to. So it's almost like, oh Daniel, we just wanted to meet with you about some business. What are you doing? You're praying. There's the mat. And of course, then they've got Daniel, and they go to the king with that. And when the king finds out about this, he is absolutely distraught. Verse 14, as soon as the king heard the statement that Daniel had been doing this, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel, and even until sunset he kept exerting himself to rescue him. So Darius, or Cyrus, can be called either, when he hears about it, Daniel's obviously already got a good relationship with Darius, which is quite remarkable, because it took him a while to get that with the Babylonian rulers. But with Cyrus seems to have really locked in on Daniel and to have regarded him very highly. So he really tries very hard to figure out a way of getting Daniel out of this. But he can't, and the law has to be carried out the same day. And so what do? They throw him into the lion's den. We all know the story here. Sunday school kids. Do the Sunday school kids know the story? Daniel in the lion's den? Yeah, they know the story. Okay. The kids, all the kids know the story. Most of the adults know the story. They not only throw him into the den, the lion's den, but they also then seal it, and not just with the king's seal, but also with the high officials. So there's a whole bunch of seals. So the king can't sneak there at night because they know the king favors him and would like to get him out. So they're doing it so the king can't just sneak in, break the seal, get Daniel out, put the seal back on. Right? That nobody can get up to any funny business then early in the morning, maybe feed the lions so they're not hungry, and so on. Lions are obviously hungry. So the king has a really bad night as a result of this. So he really cares about Daniel. And he couldn't sleep. And he gets up very early and he goes to the den. And when he gets near it, verse 20, when he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God. So notice what he's doing here. He's actually calling on the God of Daniel as well. He's acknowledging the God of Daniel. Now, I think part of this is because he's already aware of Isaiah's prophecy with regard to himself. Maybe just very quickly, let's go to Isaiah chapter 45 and just read this. And remember, Isaiah was written about from 745 BC, and this is about 536 BC. 536, 636, 736, 200 years plus in between these prophecies. All right. So, and let's just read verse 27 and 28. Somebody got 44, 27 and 28. Just read verse 28. Anybody got 44, 28?
Verse 28. Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt. And of the temple, let its foundation be laid.
And what's fascinating about this is a prophecy 200 years before they go back to Jerusalem. And under the reign of Cyrus, only the foundation of the temple is laid, nothing else. And that's what's specifically mentioned here with regard to the building of the temple. So that's fascinating with regard to that. And then 45 verse 1.
This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose the right hand I take hold of. Whose the right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him, so that he will not be judged.
Okay, and so, Josephus actually talks about Cyrus being made aware of these prophecies. And I wonder if it was Daniel himself who made him aware of these prophecies. So he's already favorably disposed to a God that he knows exists and can tell the future, Cyrus is. And so when he comes to Daniel, in Daniel chapter 6 and verse 20, that's where I was. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Can you hear the plea in that? Right? It's almost like he's also talking to God, not just Daniel. It's almost like he's saying, God, he's your servant, remember? Have you delivered him from the lions? So it's almost like he's not just speaking to Daniel, but God also. Yes.
It's starting in verse 16 actually, when he was thrown in there. Because he says to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually deliver you.
Yes.
So you can see that he already believed that God will deliver them.
Yes, your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. Okay? But he's had a pretty bad night. That's his optimistic viewpoint, that Daniel's God is going to deliver him. And when he's coming towards the lion's den, it's almost like a plea and say, God, you did deliver him, didn't you? You did. Okay, please, let it be that you delivered him. That's kind of the attitude that he seems to have when he comes to it. And then, what do you get from Daniel? O king, live forever. The normal greeting to the king. Daniel gets. And you can imagine his result. And we know the story. The angel had shut the lions' mouths, and he hasn't been harmed at all. So the king's delighted. He gets Daniel is taken up out of the den. He was probably lifted up through the roof on a rope. Just, they would normally throw in the food from the roof. And then the king takes his revenge to some extent, Daniel's revenge, because he knows he's been duped on this one. Right. So now that Daniel has survived, he takes all of these guys who conspired and basically conned him to have this decree, and he tosses them and their children into the lion's den. Don't tell the kids this. Shut the kids' ears. Don't tell the kids this. Alright? And he tosses them in down the chute, and before they even reach the bottom, the lions are obviously very hungry. And possibly these guys have been making sure that before Daniel, they planned this, right? And 30 days, giving themselves 30 days. So they probably made sure the lions were really hungry when they tossed Daniel into the lion's den. So that it wouldn't be the case of Daniel somehow surviving. So when this group of people, before they even reach the bottom, the lions have got them. They're that hungry. So it really shows God's intervention in the whole process. It talks about the lions overpowering them and crushing all their bones. So the Risa king wrote to all the peoples, the nations, and the men of every language who are living in the land, may your peace abound. Make a decree that in the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever, and his kingdom is one will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. So here you've got an acknowledgement from the greatest ruler of the time that there is a God who is above other gods, and he has a kingdom that will not be destroyed. And this is one of it's almost like a king has been given this insight by God himself, because a lot of what Daniel is about this kingdom of God that is going to come, that is eternal, that God is going to establish, that can never be destroyed. This kingdom. And you've got, right before you start to get some of the visions concerning that kingdom, you've got Darius, Cyrus, Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Persian, talking about the living God who endures forever. And he's going to have a kingdom which will not be destroyed. That is a huge theme in Daniel. And you've got the Persian king, who at that time is ruling a temporary kingdom. In actual fact, one that is going to fall to the Greeks in time. Acknowledging that there is a God who endures and who has a kingdom that will endure as well. He's been given the example from that. So it's almost like this is a prophecy given to Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Persian, regarding this one true God, Yahweh of the people of Israel. He's the living God, and He endures forever. This is not an idol, but a God who lives. And His kingdom will not be destroyed, and His dominion will be forever. And verse 27, He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lion. So He backs it up with something that God has actually already achieved, the rescue of Daniel. So that's almost like it's putting it side by side, but it's giving the idea of Daniel as a whole book. That here you have this God working through His faithful followers with all of these major kings and rulers, and that He's setting that up to actually then focus on the kingdom which is going to be established, which will last forever. So that whole idea that you've got here in verse 26 and 27 underpins what is going to happen next with regard to the visions that Daniel has in the next chapters. So we're in for a fascinating time, and looking forward to it. So it'll be fun. It'll be quite a ride, the next part of Daniel. It'll be somewhat quite different. Anybody that we need to pray for? Anything in particular that we need to keep in prayer?
Just think we need to pray for the students who are writing.
Students who are writing? Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. Brother Tyler, could you lead us in prayer? Also remember the congregation and the plans that we have and the needs that we have, and put that in the Lord's hands.
Just again.